that I will be speaking to you on the topic drinking from the poetic fountain. Some thoughts on the teaching and learning of poetry. The first part of the title, I should say, is a bit too poetic. I should say poetic even to the extent of being showy. But the second part is matter of fact. I wanted the title to be so. I wanted the title to be so because one of the themes I will be dealing with in the course of my lecture is the contrast between prose and poetry, both of which we need. I wanted the title itself to reflect the contrast. That is why I phrased my title in this manner. First of all, before I come to the more important part of my lecture, I should like to begin by narrating a story. Actually, it is not a story. It's only an incident which has got some symbolic or allegorical import. I'm narrating this story because the story seems to illustrate two different aspects of the study of literature. And the two different aspects of the study of literature are enjoyment of literature and interpretation. William J. Long begins his famous history of English literature by citing this story. At least one romantic poet has written a poem on this story. And this is the story. A man and his son, young son, were walking along the seashore. The sunset was about to happen, and against the background of the setting sun, the sea stretched away as far as the eyes can see. As he walked on, the boy found a seashell lying on the sand. He took it out and he held the seashell, the hollow part of it, close to his ear. Well, what will you hear if you hold a seashell to your ear when you are at the seashore? The boy heard multitudinous sounds coming out of it. Murmurings, whisperings, millions of bits of sounds streaming into his ears. Delighted by this experience, the boy stood there, unaware of everything that was happening around him. And then the boy turned to his father with a question. He could have felt that his enjoyment of that experience would become richer and fuller if he had the answer to certain questions which had begun to arise in his mind. He asked his father, why so many sounds, so varied and so sumptuous, came out of the hollow of the seashell? The father gave him the scientific explanation. He said that actually the boy was listening to the roar of the sea. The roar of the sea got transformed into echoes and reverberations inside the seashell. There was transformation taking place inside the seashell, and this transformation accounts for the pleasure that the boy was able to experience while listening to the seashell. This story, as I have already said, illustrates two aspects of the study of literature, all forms of literature, especially poetry. First of all, the boy listening to the murmurings coming from inside the conch stands for enjoyment. And the explanation the father gives stands for interpretation. And these are the two aspects of the study of all forms of literature. And this story, I should like to say, suggests that the first one, that is to say, the enjoyment of literature, should take precedence over the second one, that is to say, interpretation. It seems to suggest that the teacher, and the father here stands for the teacher, should guide a student into the poem and let him discover what he can inside the poem. He should not stand between the poem and the boy and the student. Well, I'll be coming back to this point a little later. But before we come to the more serious part of the lecture, let us be very clear in our minds as to the differences between prose and poetry. A lot of people think that there is some opposition between prose, the two entities, prose and poetry. Some students believe that poetry is an unnecessary invention which is made use of in order to make their life difficult for them. You may have heard of G.M. Hopkins, the great 19th century poet. Hopkins's brother, who was a philologist, notoriously defined poetry as the poorest way of putting things. Actually, there is no opposition between prose and poetry. Poetry is harmony. And what is prose? Dryden refers to prose as the other harmony. We need both, and we should study both, practice both. And so there is no opposition between the two, but there are differences. And I am going to speak to you about the differences. I am able to make out 4 major differences between the two. Now, what is prose? Writing prose is actually a utilitarian activity. It is utilitarian in the sense we use prose to transmit our ideas, to convey pieces of information to other people, to disseminate knowledge, to speak to other people about our ideas. It is utilitarian. What about poetry? We don't read poetry for knowledge. Nobody will read William Blake's poem, The Sick Rose, to get information about roses. We read poetry for pleasure, not for information. And this is the first and by far the most conspicuous difference between prose and poetry. Secondly, prose deals with ideas, deals with thoughts. What about poetry? Poetry also deals with ideas. Poetry also deals with thought. Then what's the difference? The answer is the thoughts we find in prose are thoughts pure and simple. Nobody changes these thoughts. But the thoughts we find in poetry are thoughts which are tinged with emotion. Only poetry can express emotions which are tinged, feelings, ideas which are tinged with emotion. The thoughts we find in poetry are elevated thoughts. The thoughts we find in poetry are beautiful. The thoughts we find in poetry are thoughts which have been transformed by the power of imagination. The second difference, I repeat, is that prose presents thoughts as such without making any change. But in poetry, we transform thoughts. Thoughts are tinged with emotion, while prose appeals to our sense of reason, poetry appeals to our aesthetic sense, our sense of beauty, our emotions. And there is a third difference. We often say that poetry begins where prose leaves off. All kinds of ideas cannot be expressed with the help of prose. When you are emotional, when you are overwhelmed by sublime and elevated thoughts, prose will express its inability to give expression to these ideas. But these ideas, which cannot be expressed by prose, go off like rockets when you express them in the medium of poetry. I invite your attention to a passage in Shakespeare's Macbeth. In Act 4, immediately after the death of Lady Macbeth, the attendant, Satan, comes to Macbeth and tells him that the lady has died. And this stirs an overwhelmingly huge amount of emotion in Macbeth. He thinks about the meaninglessness of his life, the futility which is confronting him. And he comes out with a magnificent speech. You may know them. Is it possible to translate this speech into prose? Prose will throw up its hands in despair. It cannot be attempted. And what is that passage? Tomorrow, tomorrow, and tomorrow creeps in the petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Life is a walking shadow. It's a poor player that struts and frets upon the stage and is heard no more. Then come the magnificent lines. Life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing in prose. Now coming to the fourth difference, and this is something everybody is aware of. As all of you know, a word has got two kinds of meaning. The first one is called denotation. Denotation is the dictionary meaning, the definition given in the dictionary. The other meaning of a word is connotation. Connotation is the emotional flavor of a word. When you say a particular word, sometimes your emotions are affected because that word has got some connotations. Take for example, the word home. Home is the place where we live. But what is the connotation of the word? When you say or read the word home, somehow we feel affected. We think about the warmth of relationships. We think about the idea of security, affection, relatedness, and so on. The point I am making is this. In prose, we are satisfied with the denotation of a word. In poetry, we care more for the connotation. I don't mean in poetry we care only for the connotation. I mean only that in addition to the denotation, we care for the connotation of a word also. So I have been outlining the differences between prose and poetry. I have pointed out that the two differ in four major ways. Now, when I spoke about the second difference, I said that poetry contains thoughts which have been transformed by the imagination. I said poetry contains beautiful thoughts, elevated thoughts, and thoughts which have been transformed by the imagination. And I'm going to speak to you about this idea, namely the transformation which poetry effects. Poetry has been defined as a special way of using words, a special way of using the language with the intention of exciting pleasure, not to give information, with the intention of exciting pleasure. And we excite pleasure by transforming the thought from what it is into something new. I think I'll give you an example. An example from nature or from our everyday life. Think of a piece of iron, an iron rod, 1 foot long, maybe shorter, maybe longer. You need it for a utilitarian purpose. Without this iron bar, you cannot make instruments or implements. Now, put this iron bar into fire. Let it lie there for some time. When you take out this from the fire, some 15 minutes later, you discover that the piece of iron which you put into the fire has become red hot or even white hot. It is not the gray, rusty piece of iron which you threw into the fire. It is something new. It is incandescent. It is capable of emitting light. Now, this is what happens when, with the fire of imagination, you work on an idea and transform it. The transformed thought is able to give us pleasure, while the raw thought, the thought which is not transformed, is like a piece of prose. I'll give you a passage from poetry. First of all, let us read what the Bible says about the first miracle of Christ. You know that. The gospel says that Christ had the jars filled with water. He then went to them, looked into them, and they became wine, red wine. This is the presentation of a fact. This is the uncolored reporting of an incident. The 17th century English poet, metaphysical poet, Richard Crashaw, has dealt with the same miracle in his own way. I quote, "Water saw its master, it blushed." Blushing is the rushing of blood onto the face. Water here is imagined as a woman. There is transformation. And this woman saw her master. Naturally, she blushed. Instead of saying that water became red wine, he says that water saw its master and it blushed. I will quote another passage, this time also from Macbeth. After Duncan has died, Macbeth is always poetic, and he says, after life's already the death of Duncan, Macbeth says, fever of life, Duncan sleeps. The word there, life becomes a fever. All that he says is the fever has broken, and Duncan is enjoying a lucid interval, so to speak. Now, in order to bring out the difference between prose and poetry, I will place before you another example. Examine it and decide whether it is an appropriate simile. Suppose a man is walking. He is walking because he has to go to some place. It is a utilitarian. I mean, walking is a utilitarian activity. He walks. When he walks, his legs are involved. His entire body is involved. And from one place, he goes to another place on foot. Now, place side by side the picture of a man who is walking and the picture of a person who is dancing. What's the difference between walking and dancing?
Hello?
Verse means lines written metrically. Lines which are metrical. Lines which are rhythmical. A lot of people think that everything that is presented in the medium of verse is poetry. This has no correspondence with the truth. Again, a lot of people think that poetry can be written only in verse. That is also wrong. Poetry is independent of the metrical language, although 90% of all poetry exists in verse form. Why do we write verse? In olden days, verse was written, even scientific books were written in verse. If you write something in verse, it becomes easy for the reader to commit it to memory. When we were children, I remember geographical theorems were written in the form of slogas in Malayalam. There is nothing poetic about a straight line intersecting another straight line. Verse is used as an aid to memory. I'll give you an example and tell me if these lines contain any poetry at all. 30 days have September, April, June, and November. February has 28, etc., etc. You know that verse. Now, this is verse. One should not confuse it with poetry. Why do I say that this is not poetry? I call it verse and not poetry because the transformation, which is the hallmark of poetry, is absent here. But you can turn some of these lines into poetry by changing them. February has 28. Suppose you say February is the poor man among the months. It becomes a poetic statement. Actually, we are not imparting information. We have transformed the earlier version of the same idea and presented it in a poetic form. Suppose you say, greedy August has robbed February of one of its days. Perhaps you know the reference. August was given the present name in honor of Augustus Caesar. Originally, August had only 30 days and February had 29 days. They wanted to make it a 31-day month. So they took one day from February and gave it to August. Suppose you put it in this way, greedy August has robbed February of one of its days. The earlier version is not poetry, but the second version is poetic, because the second version contains the principle of transformation, which is so vital, so important in poetry. We have been discussing the two topics, prose and poetry. We have been enumerating the differences between prose and poetry. And then we placed poetry and verse side by side and looked at the differences. Now, let me proceed to deal with the second part of my topic. Some thoughts on the teaching of poetry. In connection with the story of the little boy and the seashell, I said that the enjoyment of poetry, the enjoyment of literature should be given precedence over interpretation. I said that the ideal situation is the situation in which the teacher does not stand between the poem and the student. We should allow the poem communicate directly to the student. This is sheer idealism. Although I am of the opinion that enjoyment should precede interpretation, I don't think this is a practicable proposition. A student on his own cannot get into a poem and discover for himself what is there in the poem. Several obstacles stand in his way. What is the first one? The very first one. On his way into a poem, the student is stopped by his own inadequate linguistic resources, his own inadequate proficiency of the language. The linguistic resources of the average student are not strong enough to meet the demands a poem makes. The language of poetry is slightly different from the language of prose. Poetry with its inversions and the different forms of poetic license confuses the student, and he will put aside the poem and walk away. Another difficulty the student experiences is with regard to the poetic style. Poetry or poets do not believe in explicit, that is clear, explicit statement. They believe in the art of suggestion. Meaning should be suggested rather than explicitly stated. A student begins to read a poem in the hope that the poem will give him in a platter everything he needs. Actually, the poem hides meaning, and the poet has to exert himself. The poet has to exert himself very much in order to get the meaning out of a poem. Thirdly, the use of the rhetorical devices, figures of speech, allusions, imagery, all these also stand in the way of the student. These are only some of the problems a student confronts. I mentioned these with a good intention. I hope the teachers will become aware of these problems the student faces when they stand before their students ready to present a poem. Now, coming to the teaching of a poem in the actual context in the classroom, I should like to tell you just a few things. I may not be able to present all the ideas. I'll be selective. I have been following certain practices, and based on my own experience, I can tell you that these practices have been found very, very effective. I'm not asking you to adopt the practices which I am following. I also have found it from various sources. I want to tell you that if you make use of some of these practices, you will be able to do your work much more efficiently than otherwise. I have been taking a few steps. What I would like to call the first step is proper preparation. A teacher who has to present a poem in a class should see to it that he reads the poem, studies it thoroughly, visiting every nook and corner of the poem. He should have such mastery of the poem that he should be able to account for the use of the punctuation marks in the poem. And my advice to them is they should not, if they do not know the meaning, they should not guess the meaning of a word. It is often said that a teacher should have by his side a good dictionary. Not when he is in the class. When he is in the privacy of his room, he should have beside him a good dictionary. There is no suggestion that he doesn't know the meaning of the words in the poem, there is a possibility that a word may have half a dozen different meanings. The meaning which is appropriate to the context should be found out with the help of a dictionary. It is also possible that if your poem is a 17th century poem or a poem of an earlier date, some of the words might have changed their meanings. For example, the meaning of the word sad, S-A-D, in Milton's time was serious. Sad virgin in Milton means serious virgin. The word brave in the 16th century meant splendid. If you go unprepared, you will make mistakes, commit blunders. And I now call to mind an incident from my own experience. I was attending my first poetry class in the college. The teacher was a very reputed person. The poem he was teaching was the ballad of Father Gilligan. An epidemic was visiting a town, as is happening now, and Father Gilligan went from house to house, ministering to the spiritual needs of the dying and the sick. Father Gilligan returns home. As soon as he sits in his chair, a man comes running. He tells the father that he should go along with him to the bedside of his father who is dying. Incidentally, when there is a plague in Europe, whenever there was a plague, it was the clergyman who had to bear the brunt of it. When Black Death visited Europe in 1348, we are told in the parish of Norwich alone, 800 clergymen died in the course of 2 years. Coming back to our poem, the father was so tired that he excused himself and continued to sit in the chair without going along with the man. He fell asleep. When he woke up, he was filled with remorse for not having obliged the man. That is the context. And he cried, "Mavron, Mavron, the man has died while I slept in the chair. Mavron, Mavron." The teacher explained that Mavron meant the Blessed Virgin Mary. Mavron, Mavron, the man has died. Years later, when I became a lecturer, I taught at least 2 batches of students explaining the word in the same manner. Blessed Virgin Mary. It's not an English word, so you don't find it in the dictionary. And then an editor asked me, to edit this poem along with a few other poems. And then I was determined to find out the meaning. I found out the meaning, and to my great surprise, I found that the word really meant, alas, no Blessed Virgin Mary, alas, alas. On another occasion, there was, I was attending the poetry class. The poem the teacher was explaining was Dryden's Alexander's Feast. In Alexander's Feast, there is a line. See, a feast is in progress. People are running about. There is a line, give the oboes breath. It's an interest. Communicate their meaning through their very shapes. Ordinary poetry also can communicate a small amount of meaning through its very shape. I'll ask the students to look at the poem and I will ask them a number of questions. I won't wait for the answer to pay special attention to that word. It as a sonnet. Structurally, the 15th line, see, it has already yielded valuable data. Will be 5.
போலீஸ் சர்டிபிகேட் கொடுத்தா நான் இருக்கக்கூடாதுல்ல, அதனால அதுக்கு அந்த டேட் போடாம கொடு.
Here's something to, when I consider student to find out what the poem is about. Now, about that alters when it alteration finds or bends with a remover to remove. The first two letters, the English word for it is bans, B-A-N-N-S. What is the second part of the bans? After announcing that somebody belonging to this parish is going to marry somebody belonging to another parish, the priest will say, if you are aware of any impediment, why this marriage should not take place, you should approach the authorities. If you do not link it to the English, there will be more than ocean water broken. Link it to any statement by anybody.